Those eyes, the heat of the African steppe seemed to melt the earth. The horizon line almost rippled, and the layers of air vibrating on the surface of the earth blurred everything. Nature's language seemed silent that morning. Normally, in the morning, the melodies of the waking birds would waft through the bushes, the wind would whisper something through the dry leaves. But today, there was nothing. It was as if all of nature was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Orwin Vale stood straightening his old ranger jacket, sweat mingling with the sweat on his back. He scratched the dry earth with the toe of his shoe. He lowered his binoculars and looked into the distance, but again he could see nothing. There was something in the air. Something unknown, something disturbing. He had been patrolling this reserve for 12 years, but today's silence, it was different from the others. It was as if something was not approaching. As if it had already arrived and was somewhere staring and watching. Just then he detected movement. A vibration, a shift in the grass on the left side of the road. At first he thought it was a bird, then a fox, but no. It wasn't that big. But not that small. He raised the binoculars again. Yes, there was an animal. Its long body close to the ground, its head low, its breathing visible. But the strange thing was, it had 3 legs. Orwin's heart began to beat a strange beat in his chest. A 3-legged animal, so close? And alone? He held his breath. Silently he adjusted the binoculars, bringing them closer. When the image came into focus, for a moment he couldn't believe his eyes. A lion. But not the one he was used to. This animal was, surprisingly incomplete. It was tired. Its mane yellowed in the sun, its shoulders slumped. And its front right leg was missing. Completely missing. Not an injured limb, a missing limb. In its place was only a scar, a slightly bloody tissue, a cavity covered with dried flesh and dust. But what froze Orwin the most were those eyes. The lion was looking at him. No, not just looking into his eyes. Orwin had never experienced anything like it. This was not the look of a wild animal. It was a look that asked for help. No, more than that, it was a look of recognition. That strange electricity between two people, the only two in the entire universe. In those eyes, there was a past. That he took a step back. He lowered the binoculars. His heart skipped a beat. The lion didn't move. Orwin cocked his head to the side. "No," he said, almost in a whisper. "You can't be you." 12 years ago, just after a rainy season, a small lion cub was found trapped. Without telling anyone, Orwin had taken him behind the bushes and treated him in secret. It was against official procedure. But that cub, those little eyes, he never forgot. Then one morning the cub quietly disappeared. Orwin thought it might be dead. But part of him always whispered, no, it survived. That animal lying in front of him now, that old, 3-legged lion, was it him? He couldn't tell. But those eyes, they were telling something. A past. A debt or a farewell. That he shook his head from side to side. "This is crazy," he said. But he didn't back down. For a while there was a silent communication between him and the lion. One did not speak. The other listened. And yet everything seemed to be said. Orwin returned to his car. In the back seat he took out the package of raw meat he had bought at the market that morning. The lion was still there. Unmoving. But his eyes, they never left him. He approached slowly. With each step his heart beat a little faster. His instincts screamed, "Be careful." But there was another inner voice, "This is what you must do." As he got closer, the lion's breathing could be heard. Muffled, painful, but calm. Orwin crouched down. He put the meat in front of him. He looked at the lion with his eyes. "This may not feed you, but it's a start." The lion stuck out its snout slightly. He stood up with difficulty. He stood on 3 legs. Every movement was an effort, a struggle. But then, something happened. The lion's head turned. He looked at Orwin. He lowered his head, without taking his eyes from his eyes. And he gave a little bow with his head. Or so it seemed. Something inside Orwin snapped. He fell to his knees. His eyes welled up. "Is that you?" he said. "Is it really you, little buddy?" Just then, the radio in his pocket buzzed. A call from the protection center. "Orwin, we need your location." "Is there a problem?" Orwin blinked, picked up the radio. "Yes," he said. "Not a problem. There's a miracle here. I'm sending my coordinates, please, now." He closed the connection before there was a reply. He turned his eyes back to the lion. He was still there. Still watching him. The sun was beginning to tilt to the west. The shadows were getting longer. The birds were still silent. And the wind, it finally started to blow. There was something in this wind. It was as if all of nature was breathing again. The lion closed his eyes. And laid his head gently on the ground. But he was still alive. And Orwin knew, this story was just beginning. Maybe this would not be just a rescue operation, maybe it was a story of reckoning, of atonement, of remembrance. But one thing was certain, those eyes had never forgotten. The sky was slowly turning red. Shadows stretched across the horizon, as if whispering that time was slowing down, that even nature was holding its breath. Orwin knelt beside his vehicle, watching the three-legged lion still lying on the ground. In that moment, time froze. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing. The static from the radio pierced Orwin's ears once more. "Dispatch here, emergency response team en route. Location received. We'll be with you in 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Normally it was a reassuring amount of time. But now, those 30 minutes had turned into an eternity of waiting. Because Thurun, yes, he was using that name in his mind now. Thurun's breathing had become erratic. Each wave of air that came out of his nose made the dust on the ground tremble slightly, but those tremors sat like stones in Orwin's heart. With each breath, Thurun's body moved a little closer to the ground. And his eyes were still on him. But there was something else in them now. Fatigue. Orwin approached softly. There were only a few meters between them now. Normally, as a ranger, getting this close to a lion was both forbidden and insane. But this was different. Very different. Those eyes were no longer just familiar, but staring, saying goodbye. "No," Orwin said in a whisper. "Not now. If you summoned me, you cannot let me go." But Thurun's eyes no longer heard those words. Or so it seemed, and then, from far away came the sound of an engine. Thin, vibrating, mixed with dust. Orwin stood up immediately. He fixed his eyes on the horizon. "Here they come." 3 vehicles. They were approaching fast across the savannah, leaving the dust clouds behind. At the front, Renzo's vehicle. She recognized him immediately. Behind, the other 2 support vehicles. Orwin felt a moment of relief. But then, the anxiety escalated again. What if it's too late? Vehicles slowed down in the rocky area. The engines went silent. Silence fell again. But this time, it was a silence full of people. Dr. Renzo Malek was the first to emerge, as he had expected. Despite his young age, the lines on his face bore the scars of hundreds of rescue operations. His eyes were not glazed but wary. Taha descended behind him. His posture was as sharp as ever, swift and as if he was trying to keep everything under control. And finally, Caleb came out of the other door with heavy steps. Quiet, careful. Caleb didn't always say much. But his eyes said everything. Renzo walked up and approached Orwin. "What did you find?" he asked. Orwin nodded, his voice forked. "It's a lion. But it doesn't look like one. I mean, something else." Renzo frowned. "Something else how?" Orwin did not answer. He pointed at Thurun with his eyes. Renzo didn't understand at first. But as he got closer, his expression changed too. "My God," he said. This is like a ghost. An outcast from the herds, surviving on 3 legs. A lion of his age, with a wound like that, it's a miracle he survived." Caleb came to them quietly. "I need to see his wound," he said in a low voice. "I smell pus." Taha kept his eyes on Thurin as he took the transport stretcher from the vehicle. "It's not normal for him to be so calm," he said. "He is either very weak, or very wise." Renzo took a small vial from his pocket. "This is not a tranquilizer. But it might take some of the pain away." He came up to them. "If he lets me come closer," Orwin stepped forward. "He knows me. Maybe that's why he's here." Renzo looked at Orwin. He didn't ask any questions at that moment. Because his eyes saw a past in Orwin's eyes. A past that said it all, but left no words necessary. Renzo bent down, approached Thurin. The lion did not move. He stared at Renzo. There was no threat. But there was a warning. "Don't get too close," the look said. "But if you're with the right person, I'll let you." Orwin crouched down next to Thurin. "Let me," he said, as if speaking to his friend. "They can save you." Thurin's gaze stayed on Orwin for a few seconds. Then, he put his head down. "Surrender. Trust." Renzo quickly injected the drug. Caleb prepared the stretcher. Taha secured the perimeter, and finally, Thurin was carried on the stretcher in the arms of 3 men. Every movement was careful, respectful, quiet. Because this was not the transportation of a wild animal, this was the slow relocation of a legend. They got into the vehicles. Orwin sat next to Renzo. Caleb and Taha were in the back, next to Thurin. As they set off, the sun was just touching the horizon, but the real darkness had not yet begun. No one spoke the whole way. Until Renzo broke the silence. "Orwin, why do you care so much about her?" Orwin spoke without taking his eyes off the road. 12 years ago. I rescued a lion cub, secretly. No one knew. He was wounded. And then one day, he was gone." Renzo shook his head. "And this lion, he has the same eyes," Orwin said. "They're identical. And that look, he hasn't forgotten. He called me." Renzo remained silent, but Caleb's voice came from the back seat, speaking for the first time that day. "Sometimes animals remember more than people." Orwin turned his head. Caleb had a tear in his eye. "How do you know that for sure?" he asked. Caleb did not answer. But he leaned down beside Thurin. Quietly, almost inaudibly, he whispered, "I haven't forgotten either." Orwin was about to ask Caleb something when the car suddenly jerked. Taha swerved. The car skidded to the left. There was a big pothole in the road. As night fell, the roads became invisible. The other car stopped right behind them. Renzo picked up the radio. "Everything is under control. But we can't stay here long. Predators approaching at night could cause trouble." Orwin turned around. Thurin was still asleep. But his breathing had become more labored. "Time is running out," Renzo said. "We shouldn't have waited this long. His heart rate may be slowing." "How long the rest of the way?" asked Orwin. Renzo glared at him. "Another half hour." But on this road, at that moment, a sound from the bushes silenced everyone. Growls, night predators, and Thurin's eyes widened. As if he had sensed something. He forced his head up. He turned his eyes to the forest. Orwin noticed it. "He feels," he said. Taha jumped out. Flashlight in hand, he scanned the surroundings. "We have to go now." Now. But Thurin started to move. He was on the stretcher, trying to push with his weak leg. It was as if he wanted to stand up. It was impossible. But he was trying to get up. Caleb bent down beside him. Stop. Don't force yourself. But Thurin wasn't even looking. He was looking at the forest, at the darkness. He had the eyes of a warrior. Orwin narrowed his eyes. He's trying to protect us. What do you mean? Said Renzo. He's warning us of danger. He's still thinking about fighting. Just then a pair of eyes flashed out of the darkness, and then another growl. Caleb raised his weapon. But Thurin's roar, it left everyone frozen. It was a weak, hoarse, but mighty cry. Like a leader addressing his territory for the last time, and there was silence. After a while, there was nothing. No voice. No eyes. No threat, only Thurin's tired breath. Orwin stroked Thurin's head without wiping away his tears. You are not just an animal, he said. You are a reminder. And everyone fell silent. The road went on into the night, but no one was the same person they had been before this journey. The only sound that filled the vehicle as it moved through the night was Thurin's faint breathing and the crunching of the tires on the dry earth. The rhythmic hum of the engine seemed to measure the thin line between life and death. Orwin was sitting next to Thurin. He placed his hand softly on the lion's mane. Each strand was like a wound that time had drawn on him. His eyes were closed, but every hair on his body was on alert. This was not just a journey, but a kind of transition. That threshold where life is most fragile, most naked. Renzo held the steering wheel, occasionally glancing back in the rear-view mirror. His eyes, no matter how professional, could not hide the worry. This was not just a rescue operation. It was like an apology, a second chance, whispered by nature. His heartbeat is weakening, Caleb said, but he's still fighting. I can see that. Orwin was silent. He slowly raised his hand to Thurin's head. He touched the scar on the side of his face. This scar had been earned not by time, but by survival. Perhaps this story was not a lion's struggle to survive, but a man's struggle to atone for his past. It was my fault, Orwin muttered. No one said anything. But everyone heard. When did it happen? Renzo asked. Then the cub you saved, how could you let him go? Orwin kept his eyes on Thurin. I didn't. He wanted to go. When he was strong enough, his gaze changed. He wanted to go back to nature. I owed him that. But every day, I waited for him to come back. And he did, Caleb said in a whisper. But as someone else. No, Orwin said. He's the same. He has the same eyes. Only his body is enlarged and scarred. The clinic was hidden in a clearing between the savannah and the forest. From a distance it looked like just a few containers, but inside there was everything: X-rays, an operating room, medicine cabinets, and tired but skilled hands. This place offered a second chance to lost lives. But tonight, everyone in this center would have a completely different guest. As the car turned onto a dirt road, Renzo got on the radio. Get ready. Special situation. Three-legged adult male lion. Consciousness fluctuating. Infection highly likely. Adrenal response may be strong. When the door opened, the waiting team was ready. Naya, a young veterinarian, immediately approached and helped the transport team. As soon as her eyes met Thurin's, she froze. Is that him? She whispered. No one answered. But one of them knew. Yes, it is him. Once the stretcher was wheeled into the clinic, the atmosphere changed completely. Hands moving silently, quick but respectful movements. This was not an operation, but a ceremony. Thurin was vulnerable, perhaps for the first time, among people who understood him. Naya immediately checked the inflamed leg. The tissue is almost necrotic. It is necessary to establish a definite boundary. She turned to the side. Orwin, you have bonded with him. Stay with him. Orwin nodded. He moved to her bedside, never taking his eyes off Thurin. There was a moment of silence before the surgery began. The whole team locked eyes. This was no ordinary case. This was a living being entrusted to them by nature. And then, the scalpel incision began. Minutes passed. Then hours. Everyone was silent, but eyes were constantly racing to the clock, the heart monitor and Orwin's face. Just when everything seemed to be going well, there was a beep. Thurin's heart rate was dropping. Nia panicked. Epinephrine. Renzo intervened immediately. Caleb was biting his lip as he watched the monitor. No, no. Not now, Orwin lowered his head. Don't leave me, he said. You begged me. Now I'm begging you. Don't go. Thurin's eyes were squinted but open. His pupils were constricted. But inside, there was a spark. And that spark burned again. His heart rhythm returned to normal. There was a silence in the room that was beyond words. And that silence was like a cry of triumph. Orwin was alone in the post-op room. Thurin lay on a stretcher. His wound had been cleaned, his foot immobilized. The wound was not closed, but for the first time, there was no blood. Caleb entered the room. He was holding a mug. Herbal tea. It soothes the heart, not the veins. Orwin smiled. Will it work? Caleb shrugged. It won't cost either of us anything. They sat in silence for a while. Then Orwin spoke. This isn't just a rescue. No, Caleb said, it's redemption. Orwin bowed his head. All these years I thought I couldn't do anything, when, sometimes you just have to wait. Caleb shook his head. And sometimes, it comes back when no one expects it. In the morning, Thurin was still alive. But that wasn't the miracle. When his eyes opened, the first person he looked at was Orwin again. And that look. No words, no screams, no documents, could describe that moment. Thurin did not speak. But he said it with his eyes, I remember. The fragile air of triumph in the night began to dissipate like a fog in the morning. Thurin was alive, he had opened his eyes, he had looked at Orwin, yes, but that still didn't mean it was over. The morning light after the quiet victory in the clinic was only a harbinger of a new beginning. The real battle had not yet begun. Orwin had spent that night at Thurin's bedside. He hadn't slept. He couldn't sleep. He listened to his breathing without blinking his eyes, trying to catch the slightest movement. When Caleb quietly handed him a blanket in the morning, he only nodded, but he did not take his eyes off Thurin. Because the peace in him was fragile. Because he knew, nature didn't always give second chances. And if it did, there would be a price. When Renzo walked in at first light in the morning, his expression was one of concern. He looked at the monitors, checked Thurin's pulse, then turned to Orwin. We're in temporary relief. The infection may be under control, but there's still a good chance it could spread. Orwin already knew this. But his main concern was different. Thurin's mind, his soul, was that silent communication still there? Could he feel that connection? Because his eyes were still tired. And sometimes, it was as if he was gazing at a point far away. Orwin was trying to make sense of that gaze when a shrill scream from outside shattered his thoughts. A technician came in, panting, abnormal activity on the forest line. Thermal cameras have detected multiple large predators. It looks like they're approaching the clinic. Caleb immediately jumped to his feet. How close are they? About 500 meters. And fast. Renzo gritted his teeth. No, there was still time for this area. They wouldn't normally get this close this early. Orwin headed for the door. Savannah is taking cover. Perhaps. Thurin's scent has spread. And if that's true, the hunters are coming. Caleb stepped out, headed for the protective wall. They had binoculars, thermal monitors. But no matter what they saw, no matter how prepared they were, there was an uneasiness rising in them. Because what was approaching was no ordinary nocturnal predators. This was something else. More organized, more aggressive, more conscious. Tahoe radioed in. The generator in the back area has failed. Part of the lighting system is down. Risk of blackout. Renzo immediately called to his side, "We'll move Thurin's room inside. The center is in the protected area. Caleb, Orwin, come with me. Naya. Get ready." The mobilization at that moment was more than a rescue operation. It was a defense, not an evacuation. But it wasn't just a patient they were defending. It was a symbol. A living legend. A king who defied life with 3 legs. Thurin's eyes widened as Orwin took over the stretcher. It was as if he felt it. As if he knew. As darkness approached, he turned his eyes to Orwin again. "Do not be afraid," Orwin said in a whisper. "We are together this time." As they made their way to the inner center, the howls from outside began to reach inside. Everyone was in position. Tahoe was reinforcing the doors, Caleb was scanning the monitors, Naya was checking serum levels. Renzo was coordinating with the armed support team. But in that moment, the same question echoed inside everyone: will they make it? A crackle in the night. Then a hum. And then, a shadow crossed the wall. Fast, silent and very large. Caleb immediately turned the light on, but there was nothing. Just the wind. Or, so they thought. Renzo gripped his gun. "Keep your eyes open. This could be an attack." Orwin was at Thurin's head. The lion's breathing quickened. His heart was beating harder than usual, but it was not out of fear. It was preparation. It was as if he instinctively knew what was coming. As if he was preparing for one last battle. Tahoe shouted. "South Gate. There's something." Caleb ran out. Renzo after him. Just in front of the gate, 3 huge silhouettes emerged from the shade of the trees, their eyes shining. Leopards. But they weren't normal. They were bigger. And brave. Coming this close to the clinic area? It was a sign that nature was out of balance. Renzo aimed his gun. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, there was a sound. A roar. But not from outside. From inside. From the center of the clinic. Thurin, the whole stretcher vibrated. Orwin jumped up. The lion was trying to get up. He really was. He was trying to stand up on 3 legs, despite all the pain. Orwin wanted to stop him, but the eyes, those eyes, looked at him with the same determination as years ago. "Let go," Caleb said. "This is his fight." Thurin roared. More powerful this time. The leopards outside froze. They locked eyes. Silence. Tension. Then a retreat. As if they recognized that voice. As if on command. Caleb shook his head. Survival instinct is one thing. Leadership is another. Orwin crouched down next to Thurin. You are not just an animal. You are their king." The rest of the night was quiet. The threat had passed. But no one was the same anymore. Because that night, behind the walls, not just a lion had risen, but a legend. With 3 legs, a mane and 1,000 scars, but still standing, unbowed, with what little strength he had left that night, Thurin leaned his head against Orwin's hand. It wasn't just a thank you. It was a farewell, perhaps. Or a promise. "I'm here. Still." And in the morning, everything had changed. Clinic staff, visitors, journalists, observers, all came to see Thurin. But what really mattered was what they saw in his eyes. Resistance. Silence. Nobility. A 3-legged lion, and a man helping him, clinging to each other in the heart of nature, on that line between life and death. This was not just a rescue, this was the rewriting of a legend. The sky turned gray. The sun seemed to have withdrawn its light, hidden behind the clouds. The wind against the walls of the clinic building made the windows shake slightly, echoing the restlessness in the hearts of those inside. No one drank coffee that morning. No one had spoken. Thurin's room was silent. Something was happening. Everyone could feel it, but no one dared say it out loud. The air in the room was heavy, like a farewell, like a transition, but unnameable. Orwin noticed it as he smoothed Thurin's mane with his hands. The lion's eyes were open, but his gaze was fixed on a distant point. Deep, meaningful and silent. His pupils were no longer those of a wild animal, but those of a sage, a traveler. Everyone who knew him understood something from that look. It was not a farewell. It was the expression of a decision. Thurin was not leaving. Thurin was transforming. Caleb had left the door ajar. He didn't dare to enter. But Orwin beckoned him with his head. Silently he came to him. Together they sat at the head of the stretcher. Orwin stroked behind Thurin's ears. Caleb whispered as he wiped his eyes, "Sometimes some creatures don't need words to tell us what happened." Renzo had connected to the monitor from the other room. Everything seemed stable. But still, everyone inside the clinic knew something was coming. And at that moment, Thurin turned his head. For the first time in days, he tried to sit up with his whole body. His 3 legs were shaking. But he was determined. Orwin immediately tried to support him, but Thurin gave him a look as if to say, "Stop. One last walk. Maybe a few steps, but those steps would mean something else." He got off the stretcher. The glass door of the clinic opened. Everyone was outside now. The silence of the morning mingled with the hum of heartbeats. Thurin started walking. Slow, shaky but steady. On 3 legs, he made his way through the savannah. No one stopped him. Because he was not a patient. He was not an animal. He was a king that he walked towards the horizon. Each step trampled the earth, each mark engraved on hearts. And then, he stepped on a mound. He stopped there. The wind blew his mane. He closed his eyes. He lifted his nose to the sky. And once more, he roared. It was not a call. It was a memory. A message to nature, to people, to the past and the future. I was here. I resisted. And I remained myself. Suddenly something was noticed. Cameras, telescopes, tracking devices, none of them were recording. It was as if technology respected the moment and stepped back. Only hearts were recording. And Thurin, after that roar, turned and looked at Orwin one last time. There was no gratitude in his eyes. Because this was not a relationship of thanks. It was an equality. Orwin had traveled with him and he had traveled with Orwin. Like 2 heroes in the same story, and Thurin, he turned back with that look. He walked into the trees. He took his time. He was not afraid. Because he was no longer just a creature. He was a story. The story of how a 3-legged lion awakened a man's conscience and humanity. And that story would live on, not in the jungle, but among people. Orwin fell to his knees. Caleb stood behind him, put his hand on his shoulder. No one spoke. Because words were unnecessary. And Renzo whispered from afar, "Such goodbyes are not written in books. They are written in hearts." Months passed. After that day, Thurin was never seen again. But in the mornings, 3 lines drawn on the floor would appear outside the clinic door. As if someone, or something, was saying, "Don't forget," every morning. Visitors, journalists, children, everyone experienced the same silence when they heard this story. They imagined Thurin's gait, his eyes, his roar. A piece of Thurin remained in everyone. Because this was not just a wildlife rescue. This was not just an emotional animal story. This was a rebellion of the soul. And if it was you? If a three-legged lion came to you with its eyes asking for help, what would you do? Would you just watch? Or would you take a step like him, silently but with determination? Write your thoughts in the comments. Why do you think Thurin is back? What do you think humans can really learn from animals? Leave a like if this story touched your heart too. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Because in every story we tell here, there are parts of ourselves. Thank you. If one day we find Thurin's trail again, we'll be the first to share it with you.